Yes, guys, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur for your favourite show of the week, being brought to you a little bit later today. As your boy, he was up at the Ireland game yesterday, didn't get back to late. A few delays on the way home as well, so didn't get back to extremely late, but we're still getting your upload up for you guys no matter what with your boy, Shawnee from Spurs Talk Show. How you keeping, my man?
I'm good, Dave, mate. Great to always be back with the Flat Cap Army and the Irish Hotspur Army. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, my man. A little bit tired, a little bit bruised up after the international break, but look, not on a bit of handball at the weekend. Can't fix Shawnee. But look, in today's video, we are going to talk about what Tottenham's strategy is going forward, because we hear a lot about building, but what exactly does that mean? So we're going to get into it. And Shawnee, what I would say to you is that, look, we've sold Sanchez, we've ousted Dyer, we've promoted Phillips, we're bringing in the young guy, Luka Viskovic. Jack will be absolutely happy and delighted to have another itch in the squad. But it does seem to me that there seems to be a clear sort of outline and strategy, because before, when Spurs have gone and spent big in the market, Richarlison, they've missed on that. Ndombele, they've missed on that. Over the summer, they could have brought David Raya for 40. They didn't. They went and got Vicario for cheaper. They could have brought Tapsoba in for more than what they brought in Van de Ven. They chose not to. So without the club actually maybe announcing anything at all, are we starting to maybe see what the vision is going forward?
I think so. I do think so, mate. I feel like without wanting to kind of jump ahead in the conversation, I feel like Paratici's vision from 3 years ago is starting to bear fruits. And obviously there's been a lot of, noise and chaos with regards his name and his availability to do his job as that timeline has progressed. But I do think that it's, we need to reflect on what his mandate was when he came in and really what his job was. And to most Tottenham fans who are just looking solely at the first team, had every right to be frustrated with the football club and the progress or lack thereof. But ultimately, I think that everyone should take a little bit of a pause and reflect on what was the mandate of Paratici outside of that, beyond that, to right a lot of wrongs that have been happening for the previous maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And I think that some of that work that went unrewarded during his official tenure is starting to now bear fruit. And I think that same process is still taking place with the signings of people like Ash Phillips, the people like the new fella from Croatia, people like Alejo Veliz. I think that these things will take time to materialize. But in a world where Tottenham have dabbled in the expensive end of the market and have ultimately failed more often than they've succeeded, pretty much every time, in fact, that once bitten, twice shy is a thing. And ultimately, on top of that, the inflation in prices for players is moving at a faster pace than the ability for the inflation in the prices of activities that Tottenham offer and experiences Tottenham offer to be able to make those ends meet. And so Tottenham are being forced, absent the luxury of wealth that sits in the ground of certain clubs, they're forced to be able to look for other kind of mechanisms to keep up. And I think that those things take their time to materialize. But I think that for sure seems to be the direction that Tottenham are at 100% pivoting back to some sort of youth-centric model. The same model, by the way, that worked brilliantly at the start of our Renaissance period in the mid-2000s under Martin Yeo, under Harry Redknapp. That same ecosystem then that got us from where we were a long time ago, which was, and also ran, to starting to be competitive. I think we're looking back in that direction. And for me personally, I like it. I really do appreciate it.
I'd also argue it's the same under Pochettino, right? When he came in, he was using the likes of Adebayor, Holtby, people like that. Slowly got them out. Bentaleb, Mason, people like that came through. And then we relied on signings that we made in years gone by from different academies, like Kyle Walker, Sheffield United, or Danny Rose from Leeds, Aaron Lennon from Leeds. Well, not Aaron Lennon, but he came good before Pochettino. But, people get my drift. So I do think we are starting to maybe look back on that. And what I would say is, I do think it's been a purpose ploy by the club. I don't think they've just sort of been lucky by having maybe what we would call that golden generation that won the under-18s Cup. When you look at it, they've brought in Sunsup Bell, Will Lancashire, Callum Logan, Herbie James from Man City, people like that. So I do think it is something going forward. And when Paratici came in here, he was purposely trying to lower the average age of the squad, and you've seen that. And what I would also say, since we've started doing that, you can see the difference on the football pitch. We're quicker, we're faster, we're hungrier, we're moving the ball with a lot more purpose than maybe what we were before. So we are starting to see the benefits of, lowering the average age of the squad and getting some of these players in here. But don't miss this, by the way. We are going to go over to Sean's chat tomorrow at lunchtime, and we're going to maybe talk about the pathway and the development maybe for these guys into the first team. We're not going to so much touch on that here today, but make sure you set your reminders for lunchtime tomorrow for that. But Shawnee, what I would say is look, I agree with it. I've liked the philosophy from when Paratici first came in here. I'm one that was willing to take a step back and sort of maybe look at the overall plan of what they were trying to do at Tottenham Hotspur. And I think I've always argued, since you got the likes of Dyer out, Sanchez out, Lloris out, people like that, you will see a much improvement on the pitch. But then, just to play maybe a bit of devil's advocate, like the name of your show tomorrow, Shawnee, some people would argue that's just Daniel Levy being cheap. That he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to spend big money to take this club to where it is, and that it's Daniel Levy being cheap. What would you say to that? Do you think there's merit to that?
Well, I think there's merit to the concept that if you prefer to take risks on younger players rather than buy the ready now, here for now talent, there is a merit to the argument that it comes across as, I wouldn't say cheap, but unambitious. Or, I get that. I definitely get the logic behind it. What I would say is, like I said earlier, I do genuinely think that every single time in recent memory that Tottenham have thrown the checkbook at a solution, we have been the victim of poor scouting, and it's ended up being an incredibly costly exercises that happened 5-6 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, that are still costing us to this day. It's not just Ndombele, but you could make the argument for Giovanni Lo Celso. You could make the argument for Davinson Sanchez, that at the time was a very expensive signing. You could make the argument for 2 or 3 others as well. And there's very few players that Tottenham have in the top 10 most expensive signings that have ended up being successful. I think the other thing to factor in is, sorry, 1 second. I'm so sorry, mate.
You're all good.
My TV's about to turn off. Sorry. I think the other thing to factor in is the fact that, as I said earlier, that the inflation in prices of players is outperforming by a massive amount the inflation in the prices or the revenue generation abilities of what you can charge the average person in the street for certain things. Tottenham have been criticised heavily for raising ticket prices. It's not something that I personally agree with the criticism on. I understand the emotional argument against it, but I do come at it from a business and remove the emotional side and see the justification for it. But on top of that, Tottenham won't be able to find the revenue streams from the average person in the street that is generally struggling with the cost of living crisis if they are competing with, in the market, teams that have obscene wealth, untapped wealth, just never-ending wealth in the ground. And what is happening in the world of football, where the average players now, I mean, you saw it this summer, very average, or not average, very mediocre run-of-the-mill players that are not going to kind of change the game for any particular team. We're going for 50 million quid. Livramento to Newcastle, 40 million. Mason Mount, 70 million. Kai Havertz, 70 million. Conor Gallagher, we were looking to get him. He would have cost us 60 million quid. How does Tottenham, as a team that doesn't have the obscene wealth, or at least owners that are willing to tap into their own obscene wealth to make ends meet, how does a team figure out a way to stay competitive in that market that is now massively saturated and inflated because of things like what happened with Saudi Arabia? It's a very difficult square to circle, or a very difficult circle to square. And for me, one of the only realistic outcomes that you can approach that may have any kind of long-term dividend that you can yield is via finding those players before they are overly inflated. It's worked for Brighton. It's worked for Brentford. It used to work for Southampton. It used to work for Cardiff. It used to work for Swansea. It used to work for Leeds United. It used to work for a lot of the teams. Most of those teams don't survive relying entirely on finding cheap, young, developing them and moving them on. However, Tottenham, I think, need to at least indulge in that environment more than they have previously. And I hope that this is the starting point, because I don't think that we could compete given our historical track record of poor decision-making at the top end of the market. What you could argue for, to round off the conversation, is a Daniel Levy who could have a better risk appetite. He still is going to need to go into the market and pay top whack for certain players at certain times. But what he needs to make sure that he has, in order to make sure that those things are not failures, is the best scouting network in the world. And I don't necessarily think that Tottenham have really had that over the last 5 or 6 years. So a combination of going after the youth, hoping that 80% of them work out, but also still not neglecting the fact that at times for the first team, you're going to need to spend big in order to fill the holes. But just make sure that you make better decisions, and we haven't done that in the past.
Look, on that, first of all, I'll never agree with upping the ticket price, especially at time of, inflation. But look, that's a conversation that we've already had that we're not going to go into. You have your side of the argument, which I fully understand, and I have mine, which hopefully, I know you understand that too. But look, on to what you were saying there, Shawnee, I think, look, you look at the Brighton model, you look at the Brentford model, you can't argue with it, right? It's success. I'd argue Tottenham were the first to sort of devise that model that it sort of became successful. But my opinion on with them sort of models, it'll only bring you to a certain level of success. You look at Leipzig, right? They adopt a similar model over in Germany. They haven't won the Bundesliga. They haven't been able to get over the line in the Champions League. You look at Tottenham. Yes, it brought us to Champions League, but we haven't kicked on from there. And when I look at the club's sort of finances, Sean, when I looked into it, I think across 2022, I think they brought in, was it 2021, one of them, whatever way it's backdated, they brought in over 500 million in through all their different revenue sources alone. Well,
440 million pounds was the revenue from 2022.
Because the thing is, I'd argue that Tottenham have more revenue sources in terms of income, diverse revenue sources, than any other sports club maybe around the world through various methods, through Spurs Play, two club shops, one at the stadium, one somewhere else in London. You've also got the TV revenue, you've got the stadium tour, you've got the skywalk, you've got the abseiling, you've got so basically, people get my point. You've got so many bits of different diverse revenue streams that maybe other clubs don't have. At what point does Daniel Levy take, or what point as a financial person can you afford to take that leap so that you can start getting in some of these bigger players and competing with some of these bigger clubs so that we can get to that next level?
Well, I think that is the point, right? So I think Tottenham were, there's obviously a massive difference between revenue and profitability. Tottenham have one of the lowest wage to revenue ratios in the league traditionally, and our revenue numbers are growing. We're about the same as Chelsea, at least on last year's metrics. But if you were to take a look at someone like Manchester United, I did a video about this the other day. I believe that Manchester United's revenues are about 520 million or something like that. I forget the number specifically. I could be wrong, so please don't go at me in the comments if I'm wrong about the specifics, but it's about sort of 20-30% higher, and they are the biggest brand in world football. Now, they don't have the ability to use that stadium for the same things we do. Tottenham are kind of maximizing the juice from the squeeze that Tottenham's brand currently offers. A lot of people sit there and say, why can't we just go and get the naming rights, for example? Like, that's going to be the game changer, and the absence of Daniel Levy striking a deal on that is unforgivable. To me, it's really there's more to it than that. The benefits of being able to still maintain the name of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium whilst presenting NFL games and Beyonce concerts, etc. Those sorts of things have indirect yield in terms of brand awareness. People that don't follow Tottenham, don't even like the Premier League, that go to the Beyonce concerts, they're aware of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Tottenham Hotspur, as far as I'm aware, is the fastest growing supported club in America. And America, of course, is the biggest juice that you want to squeeze in terms of revenue or future revenue. So the absence of a naming rights deal that would have been called the Amazon Arena, yes, we've missed out on 25-30 million pound a year, whatever it might have been for the years that have gone by. But you won't be able to really calculate how much money we've actually made or we could make in indirect revenues from people being aware of Tottenham Hotspur, who were not fans of the Premier League, not fans of football, not fans of Tottenham Hotspur, by them coming to the stadium by broadcasters talking about the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium when they're showing NFL, when they're showing Beyonce, whoever else.
It even got brought up in the Tyson Fury and Ngannou press conference the other day.
100%, right? 100%. So the indirect value of maintaining the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium as a brand is also something you can't really calculate, but it's not going to be inconsequential or insignificant. What I would say, mate, is that I think that the fastest growing inflation in football is the price of players because of Saudi Arabia, because of the money that's coming in from, or the interest from those sovereign wealth funds. And to a degree, you could make the argument that they are deliberately overpricing those players because it means that if you want to compete, then you have to pay. Let's give you an example. If we wanted to sign Conor Gallagher, all my things. Focused.
Yeah, no, I can see it.
Conor Gallagher would have cost 60 million quid. That's about 12 to 13% of our club's total revenue, not profit, just for a player that most people aren't even that interested in signing. Brennan Johnson costs 50 million quid all in, 45 million quid, whatever. That is 10% of Tottenham's entire revenue last year, which is one of our best revenues in the history of Tottenham Hotspur. And it just goes to show you that the inflation in the price of players is so far higher than the ability for revenue streams to catch up with it, that Daniel Levy is caught between a rock and a hard place. He's trying to find ways to generate revenues that don't naturally hit the pocket of Tottenham fans. He doesn't want to, I'm sure I'm speaking for him here, but he doesn't necessarily want to have to go and always up the prices of tickets for Tottenham. He's trying to find other ways where other people that don't support Tottenham can supplement the revenues of Tottenham Hotspur. But even then, he's criticised for doing it because it's turning the stadium into an events organization. We're not even a football club anymore. We're just now an entertainment complex. He gets criticised for doing that. And the same people then criticize him for not being able to show the ambition on the pitch. But unless you have a bottomless pit of wealth, unfortunately, you can't make the rubber meet the road. And that to me that's where, from my perspective, I find it difficult to kind of entertain the argument. He needs to try and do what he can. But whilst the inflation in player prices is what it is, it's always going to be a difficult thing to be able to compete. And so that is, for me, sorry, I've been talking for a while.
No, I get it.
That for me is the reason why I think the natural conclusion is that you have to pivot towards youth players and take more risks on some of these kids that are coming out. And hopefully you can grab hold of these Luka Vukovic's that are the greatest 15-year-old footballer in world football. And you hope that the guy, when he finally arrives here, is going to be a superstar, because you'd rather not have to do what Manchester United or Manchester City or other teams are doing, which to a degree looks at teams like Brighton, or forget those teams. Let's use Chelsea. Chelsea would rather wait until Brighton have found the player and then pay 10 times what Brighton paid for the player 18 months later. Chelsea's owners are not working to the same script as Tottenham owners are.
Look, what I would say is I do think the way football finances is going now, I do think it definitely suits the way Daniel Levy looks at it from the business point of view, where it's sort of like, he's always sort of stated he doesn't want to be out there paying all that sort of top dollar for players, this, that, and the other. And look, what I will say is, hopefully now the club, we can use what the system we're using now with Paratici to get us to a certain level. And then this time, I think we do need to capitalize on it, where you're looking at maybe only 1-2 positions where you might want to upgrade in the transfer market, and you can go out and spend that big money and get that right player in. Hopefully we can use this as a stepping stone to get there, because what was never going to happen is, when we had a full team we need to sort out, we're never going to spend 70, 80, 100 million on every single position. We were never, ever going to do that. We've never done it in the past. What we've always done is we've picked up players from academies around the place, and we've formed teams out of them, like Luka Modric, Gareth Bale, people like that. And we went on to sell for huge profit. But now with the state, you could even argue Harry Kane, right? We took him from the Arsenal Academy once he was released, went on and we sold him there to Bayern Munich for 400 million. But what I will say is, hopefully that if this plan comes to fruition and Postecoglou can guide us back to Champions League football, then when you look at the squad, you can say, okay, let's go and get a world-class centre midfielder in here. And then that way you can use all your budget on that one position rather than over 6 or 7 and making it spread like we've had to do over the years. But like you said, Shawnee, all that depends on having the right scouting system in place. So far it is yielding results with what we've done over the last few years, and Paratici has slowly had to rebuild it behind the scenes, and hopefully now Tottenham can continue on in that direction. Because I would argue under Pochettino, we missed the boat on that. That's where we could have really sort of maybe went to spend big on one or two positions. Some would argue they did on Ndombele. I don't think we had the scouting network or the people behind the scenes to do the real homework on that, because we got ahead of Man City, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. You got to ask how that happens, what they've seen that we missed. But look, hopefully now we can use it as a stepping stone.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, right? About, because I completely agree with you about the Ndombele thing. Like, obviously, we felt like it was a scalp, but ultimately it turned out to be an embarrassment. I personally still subscribe to this idea, and I might be disagree with in the comment, but I think that getting to the Champions League final was the worst thing. It sounds crazy, but it was the worst thing that could have happened to Tottenham Hotspur. I think that we were jumping. You know, there's two in business, for what it's worth. There's two things that are absolutely the worst things that can happen to a business. One is to grow too slowly, and the other is to grow too fast. If you grow too slowly, you can't make your bills. You're not doing enough. You're not advertising. You haven't got a product that's worth purchasing, or a service that's worth subscribing to, or whatever. And ultimately, you've got a problem with your ultimate product value. But if you grow too fast, then other things happen. If you've got something that's too good, that's too desirable, and you're not ready to sustain it, you're not ready, you're not smart enough to know how to build it in that, and to make sure that you've got everyone happy, then you end up having too many customers that you can't keep happy. Terrible reputation emerges, and then the company dies. The worst thing that can happen to your business is to grow too slowly or to grow too fast. And I think that Tottenham Hotspur hitting the Champions League final ahead of schedule, I think it was one of the worst things that could have happened to Tottenham. It was a wonderful experience at the time, but ultimately, on reflection, I think that, you know, we weren't prepared for the next expectation level to go up from the customer base, which is the fans. And I think Daniel Levy and the people that were in charge were unprepared for that level of scrutiny that came with it, and everything, I think, fell apart. And I genuinely, I was you know, and I think that, sorry, mate, go on.
I was going to say, just quickly on that, Sean, would you argue then that they didn't have all this sort of infrastructure behind the scenes, right? Because look, we get it, right? They had the stadium, they had the training complex, but since then, we've seen the likes of Todd Klein brought in, put into a position, Paratici brought in, put into a position, scouts brought in. You know, we've changed the sort of head of the academy from Dean Rashtrick. We've brought people into the academy and stuff like that. So would you argue then that maybe I think that's the argument you're trying to make, right?
We weren't prepared. We were not prepared to get to the Champions League final. Had we won the Champions League final, or had we not, is largely irrelevant. The expectations of the club, from the fans, from the customers, from everything, was amplified to a crazy level. And the ecosystem in which we were operating from a people perspective were not ready for it. We didn't know what to do. We lost out on Eric Dyer. We'd recently got rid of people like Moussa Dembele. We'd never replaced them. We went out and we went, oh, what do we do? What do we do? We've got to get someone in. And we went and got Ndombele to be the replacement. And it was a terrible shout. I don't think that conversation would have happened. I really don't think that whole story would have manifested if we'd got knocked out in the quarterfinals at Manchester City or against Ajax. I don't think we would have gone knee jerk, but there was this natural reaction to expectations have changed, and Daniel Levy is guilty of that as well as everybody else. Expectations have changed, and I think that we got ahead of ourselves. And I think that the same, you could make the argument to a degree in the early stages of this season that Newcastle are feeling the pinch of too fast a growth. Expectations have happened there, and then they haven't quite figured it out. We'll see what will happen with some of the other clubs. I think that you need, I'll say it twice, I'll say it 3 times. Sustainable growth is absolutely what you want. Unsustainable growth is to the detriment of the outfit. And obviously growth that doesn't materialize is also to the detriment. And I think that Tottenham went through that process. And I think that now, I genuinely do believe that now we are starting to have put into place under Paratici the ecosystem, the network of what he believes is, and it's his vision. Time will tell whether he is the right guy, but for where we're at right now, I think we are seeing the reset, the rebuild, and his obvious, his past, his track record has caught up with him a little bit. And obviously that's a shame. It's a real shame. And decisions have to be made whether or not he should be rehired in 18 months' time, or whether he should stay as a consultant, but hire someone who's the director of football that is essentially his right-hand man. He could be their left-hand man, whatever, so that there's no conflict of interest between whose vision are we really fulfilling here. I'm not sure, right? I don't know. I'm trusting the system, because what I'm seeing right now is that the model, that the vision that he had, it's starting to bear fruits, and it will be interesting to see how it's. I'm sure there's still going to be a lot of hiccups, but I just think that the when the growth was like this for a long time, and then it just went like that, unless you're ready for it, you end up down here. And I think that's exactly what I've run businesses that where that's happened, and I've seen businesses where that's happened. And I think Tottenham have gone through the peak and the trough and are now trying to reset. And I'm interested to see where we go when we look at the youth team. Look at the under 21s. We look at the average age of the squad and what's capable and what we can look at, and think Destiny Udogie, is there 2 or 3 better left backs in the Premier League than him? I'd argue no. I think that we have the basis now to grow, and I hope that we can fulfill the destiny that Paratici wanted to see 3 years ago.
And look, do you know what? For me on that, I think it'd be very interesting, because obviously when Paratici interviews for the job and then he's got his foot on the table, he'll constantly outline a vision and an updated vision on where Tottenham need to head. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether Tottenham are still getting away with using the last of Paratici's vision, and whether that, sort of continues, or whether we move on from Paratici and, it changes all over again. I think it'd be very, very interesting to see how that sort of unfolds, because for me, I do think they're still listening to Paratici in the advisory role.
Would you like him to stay, to be rehired, to let him figure it out?
Look, I was one of them, Sean. I like that. I get the frustrations with the first team, but I always argued that it was going to take time. Once you start getting a lot of the old guys out, players that aren't good enough to be here, and you fill it with more Paratici signings, and you fill your 11 out with more new recruitment of Paratici signings, you will see the benefit on the pitch, and we are starting to see that. Hopefully it can continue.
How far through? Sorry to interrupt. How far through the Deadwood clear out are we? You mentioned this backstage, right? A lot of us think, most of the Deadwood's gone now, but some of the Deadwood are still on loan. But how far through the Deadwood clear out are we, Dave, in your mind?
Look, I can envision the same problems happening for us next year as they did this year, except for it won't be the likes of a Dyer and Lloris, because hopefully they'll be gone, their contracts will be up. But you'll probably get someone like a Jed Spence or someone else. That Jed Spence, I don't think will want to take a cut in his wages and move down and stuff like that. So when you look at the market, right? Yeah, we've sold Sanchez. We still have the Ndombele problem next year. You still got Jed Spence coming back off loan, Joe Roden, Japhet Tanganga, people like that. So for me, I think, you could be at the end of the window again next summer going, we've got a bloated squad. We need to find room for these to go out for us to bring in players. And ultimately, that's what hindered the end of our transfer market this summer was, whether people like it or not, and this is what I think I've tried to explain, but I think I've done a poor job of it, to be honest with you, is that Tottenham have a wage structure to adhere to. Now, Daniel Levy, when he looks at the wage structure, we have reduced wages over the couple of years, because the players we've sold compared to the players we brought in, we have lowered the wage bill, which means Daniel Levy could afford to carry a Hugo Lloris and an Eric Dyer without really sort of having to refinance all the whole club, because a couple of wages are carried that maybe they didn't need to carry. So I think they can afford to carry these wages this time around. But look, for me, this is why I argued about paying up someone like Dyer, right? You look at Dyer, he went to Daniel Levy crying to try and undermine Ange Postecoglou. And for me, him doing that sums up where we've been at the last 3-4 years, why we've seen such a high turnover of managers. Because the minute a manager isn't feeling a player, I would argue other managers gave Dyer a chance where Ange Postecoglou hasn't. Their next thing is, I'm up to the boardroom because I don't like what the manager has to say to me. And that culture needs to be ripped out of the club. And that's why I argued paying up someone like a Dyer, paying up someone like a Lloris, because it would have freed us up at the end of the market on deadline day to go and pursue targets, to get them in the door. And that's why I've argued that the club need to be a bit more ruthless. And what I mean by that is I think there's things they could do. For instance, I was listening to Peter Crouch's podcast the other day, and he'd done an interview with Wayne Bridge, and Wayne Bridge was talking about how difficult Man City made it for him, and eventually it ended up pushing him out the door and leaving this, that, and the other. And I don't think the club have done that. When you listen to, some of the stuff that's come out about the Hugo Lloris situation, that Daniel Levy has sort of left it to him to find a club over this summer. You should never have left it to him. He should have said, look, mate, your life after here is going to be difficult. You won't be training with the first team. You're not allowed in and around the building the same hours as the first team. You're not going to be playing under 21s football because we don't want you to disrupt what's going on there. But we don't do that to these players, and that's why we've carried their wages, and that's why we went into deadline day and we didn't bring anybody in, bar Brennan Johnson, because that was holding us back. And to be honest with you, Sean, I can sort of see that coming down the line next summer as well.
Well, I disagree with you a little bit about the. I agree with you what you're saying in principle, 100%. But I disagree a little bit about the idea of just paying up the contracts.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I genuinely do believe that there has been a bit of a maybe a little cabal that set up. Eric Dyer, Hugo Lloris, maybe Sanchez to a degree until the last minute. Certainly, maybe Ndombele, where they all were sitting there being told and advised, don't agree to any deal. They'll pay you out, and if you pay one out, you pay them all out. That's the precedent, and the precedent was set, a while ago with Aurier, and then Matt Doherty was someone that was on the beneficiary of that, and then obviously they were all waiting for the same thing. The ultimate situation is, though, if all of those contracts were paid out at the same time, you end up spending all the money that you would otherwise have as a budget to play for the players that you want. And I think it sets a terrible message.
I think what you're saying there applies to maybe someone on an end on better, right? 200k a week, this, that, and the other. I think with Dyer and Lloris, I think the club were able to do it with Doherty when they wanted to free up the space to bring in Porro, right? And they were still able to sort of fund that money. I know it was delayed till this summer and that, but they were still able to fund that money. And I think with the likes of Dyer and Lloris, I think now you're probably looking at them being here until January anyway. So you're already going to be end up paying up on a weekly basis 50% of the last year they're owed. So for me, why not go that extra 10, 20% and just be gone with the problem altogether? Because what you can't have is what Eric Dyer has just done to Ange Postecoglou. Because what Dyer thought was going to happen, Ange was going to sit there and go, yes, Eric, you're right. I'm going to sack Ange now. That's what Eric Dyer thought was going to happen. And for me, there's other consequences to it.
Listen, and I 100% agree. I mean, I put a video out about Daniel Levy's open door policy. If these players are available to just go and rat-a-tat-tat on his door and say, I'm unhappy, I don't agree with it. A lot of people in the comments of my video said it wasn't Eric Dyer that orchestrated the meeting. It was Daniel Levy. I don't know where that is substantiated. I'm not sure. In either way, I agree with you in principle. I do agree with you in principle. At the same time, I think we're dealing with an owner, for better or for worse, who looks at negotiations as a win-lose, a zero-sum game, where someone has to win and someone has to lose, and he doesn't want to come across as a loser in any environment. And that, you know what? To a degree, that has probably ended up being Tottenham on the beneficiary of that situation 20% of the time. 80% of the time, it's been to our detriment because he doesn't want to work in good faith. And that's 100% a tick in the con column for Daniel Levy as an owner. But at the same time, I don't think that you can simplify the argument and think that Daniel Levy has to always, take one on the chin. I think that if you set that precedent too early, too frequently, especially with the environment that we are facing ourselves right now, I think that there's going to be collateral damage that would affect us regardless. It's obviously too complex to break down for the purposes of this video. But I do think that there are that to a degree, you shouldn't necessarily always yield to player pressure, even if you think that in the long run it's going to be able to get these dead up the door. And I agree with you for what it's worth that I think that there will be more headaches to come, but I think that the headaches are fewer. I think that the fact that we're moving to a younger demographic in our team also has a lot of beneficiaries in regards their willingness to engage new concepts, to learn new systems, to take risks on the pitch, to trial things. And look, where we're at right now, I'm looking at the nucleus of our squad. I'm looking at the few players that we have that are left that are over the age of 30. There's probably two that I'm thinking of in Perisic and Sonny. And I think that they're people that want to win. And I think they're people that are buying in. And I think if you look at the two players that are senior, but in reality, they're 27 in Bissouma and Maddison. And I'm thinking these guys are going to absolutely thrive. They're coming into the prime. And everybody else, regardless of their experience at top level, is between the ages of 19 in the first team, 19 and 24. Like Pedro Porro, Kulusevski, Manuel Solomon, Vanya Romero. Like they're all young guys that are buying in. And so by hook or by crook, the past is the past. Like I stand by the rhetoric. I know it sounds extraordinarily extreme, but I do think that we got ahead of ourselves with the Champions League final, and I think that we're kind of we hit the kind of the threshold and we collapsed for a few years, and I think that now we are at the start of something that's just really building, and I think that Daniel Levy has somebody in Paratici who maybe can't be officially visible right now because of whatever's happened, but ultimately his plan was correct. And I think that we're starting to build something. And when you look through the youth team, you see that there's 7 or 8 players that are also knocking on the door in the next 2 years to come in. And I think the future looks very bright for Tottenham Hotspur. We just need to get through the last phase of the Deadwood evacuation. And that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And you know what, Sean? Hopefully, if we can get through that last phase, people might be able to listen to me a bit more because they're sick of me talking about the Deadwood all the time. So hopefully now when they're gone, people, listen to me a bit more because, I would argue that I've been right on it all along.
You've been right, mate. You have been right. You've been right a lot. You've been right a long time, mate. That's why I always come back to your channel, bro. You're always right.
That's another discussion for another day. I might have to pull up might have to start a segment called Mystic Dave, Johnny. But look, what I would say to people is, I really enjoyed this conversation today. Hopefully you guys did too. Do let me know in the comments below, what your thoughts are on what Shawnee's point is. Did we outgrow or grow too quickly, reaching the Champions League final without having all the other pieces in behind the scenes that all these other big clubs have? And has it come back to our detriment? Please let us know. I think it's a fascinating discussion. I can definitely see the argument Sean's trying to make, and I do think there's merit to it. But also, if you disagree, put it in the comments. Let me know, and let me know why you sort of disagree as well. I think that's important so we can have more developed conversation on these points. But I think it's a fantastic point. But also, get over and check out Shawnee's channel as well. Myself and Sean done a segment very similar to this, but on a different topic where we spoke about the fan forum that Daniel Levy has up and coming. What sort of questions do we want to hear asked, or that the fans want to hear asked? So make sure you get over and check that out as well. I'll set your alarms for lunchtime tomorrow for Devil Advocate with myself, Sean, and Johnny. Johnny, anything you want to say to the Flat Cap Army before we end up?
No, listen, 100%. I know what I've said about the Champions League being.
I think it's a good argument. I understand.
It's a controversial take, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some murder in the comments, and that's okay. Bring it on. We love a decent dialogue and a discussion, and we'll continue it tomorrow. Johnny and Dave, the two guys who I consider to be the freshest and the most educated on the youth system and the prospects that we have going on there. It's going to be a wonderful discussion. So I look to see you all over there as well. But Dave, thanks again, mate. I love to you, love to all the Flat Cap Army and the IrishHotspur.
I really appreciate it. Do you know what? People really like this out there. The comments underneath are absolutely insane. I would say you won last week's debate, Sean, and whether I liked it or not, I thought I should have won, but you won last week's debate.
Oh, so, did I?
Yeah, a lot of the comments were in your favor on it, So, but look. hopefully you are enjoying these. The views, the likes, the comments, and everything else are showing that you are. Please continue to get your thoughts in underneath what future topics you want to see myself and Sean wrestle with. So get them in underneath. That's it from us. We'll see you back here later on. As always, come on, you Spurs. In the big hands we trust. And his favourite motto, we never stop.
Stop.
Everywhere we go.